orange or red. That's very much an insult to those who want independence. So don't wear red. Or we'll make an example. No, don't. Now, obviously, we're talking about Ireland, so like redheads, of course, because that's Irish. But it's the clothing. What did we get to here? All right, so let's go and get right to the Treaty of Versailles. The big three. So I told you Wilson arrived. Oh, what day of the war end? Yeah, November 11th. And why did Germany feel they had to attack that spring of 1918? Why did they have to attack? Because they were worried about what coming down the road. They had attacked March 1918. They thought they had to win the war then before what? Yeah, large numbers of US troops. What were those specially trained soldiers? And who became the generalissimo of all Allied forces, the head of what French general? Ferdinand Foch. And so, the big three. So when Wilson arrived, he was met, this is him going through the streets of London and met like a conquering hero, because what was his plan for peace, the idealistic plan for peace? 14 points. But by then, it was already kind of happening. So, the head of the big three, Britain, France, and the United States. Georges Clemenceau, the tiger, the old tiger. He was a socialist, and he became premier of France during the middle of the war. And his number one goal, Germany could never do it again. Stop German aggression. Now, a lot of people believe this was all revenge, especially the British and the French, that France just wanted revenge on Germany. It's not quite true. But they really thought Germany had to be put in a position where they can attack again. The United Kingdom, David Lloyd George, he became prime minister during the middle of the war also. He was from a party. Seagulls squabbling. That's my bird story. Well, he came in during the war, and all he cared about was maintaining the British Empire. Right there. Britain had lost so much money. They went from being the wealthiest country in the world of just pure gold reserves to having almost nothing left. Oh, sure, they still had a lot of wealth, but they thought they needed their empire. So you have two different points of view. Germany never again, whatever about Europe, our empire. Which, remember, the 14 points at self-determination. Speaking of that, Woodrow Wilson came totally unprepared. He knew very little about European history, knew very little about European politics, but thought he did. And he wanted the 14 points, especially, I forgot to write this down, the league. All he thought was the league, more and more the league. And part of his problem was he got the flu. He got the Spanish flu probably a month into the negotiation, and he was incredibly ill. Now he's a little bit older. He did not have the strong reaction that younger people had, but it probably triggered novel, new viruses. Usually have some kind of cardiovascular problem. You're not immunity build up. And it probably triggered a series of microstrokes, maybe hundreds of them. Soon it will culminate with a massive stroke build up there. So he was incapacitated in ways that nobody really understood, and he didn't. And so he started slipping, and Clemenceau didn't really think much of him anyways. Clemenceau was actually offended by how little Wilson knew. Did I tell you Clemenceau's crack about the 14 points? Clemenceau looked at the 14 points as being just totally inconsistent. Never. And Clemenceau would say, Wilson has his 14 points. The Lord has 10. See. Meaning he didn't think much of them. But a bigger mistake was that Wilson never brought any GOP, remember that means Republicans. He didn't bring any Republicans, especially the powerful head of the Foreign Relations Committee, Henry Cabot Lodge. And Lodge is a big one. Lodge, who actually wanted parts of the treaty, but was necessary for passage. Republicans had taken over control of the United States Senate in 1918. and yet they need 2/3 of the Senate. He needed Republicans, and they're going to be bitter at this snub. Now, we would like to think that and personal resentments, jealousy of different politicians, those kind of things would not persuade politicians. Of course it persuades them. Lodge is mad, really mad. And Wilson showed he just did not understand the political system like he should have, especially being president for 5 years. This would be a terrible mistake, a disastrous mistake for not ratifying the Treaty of Versailles. Gee, I wonder if that's going to have something to do with the DBQ you're going to soon be taking. That's a big deal. What about the other major countries? Italy thought they would be a big four. They got snubbed. Japan, they felt they got snubbed. And Russia was not even invited, which Stalin will not forget. I wonder if this snubbing of them will have any consequence down the road. I can see nothing here. And Stalin will be talking about this all through World War II, even when he's allied with the United States to defeat Germany. So, this is actually the signing of the treaty of one of the 4 treaties in the Palace of Mirrors, a painting of it, the Palace of Mirrors at Louis XIV's palace in Versailles. I'm sorry, the Hall of Palace. Palace of Versailles, Hall of Mirrors. And the other treaties were signed in 3 different hotels in Paris, all negotiated there. We lumped them all together as a Treaty of Versailles. But this is one we care about with Germany. If you go to the Hall of Mirrors in Versailles, Versailles is really cool, but all these people went and watched the treaty being signed, and hundreds of people carved their names and little pictures into the mirrors. So the mirrors have graffiti from 1919 in them, all over. A bunch of American officers did that. So let's get to the big beat of the treaty, Germany. So the treaty against Germany, the most important thing is they have to blame Germany for the war. If they can say Germany took responsibility, then they can punish them. So they kept the blockade going for 6 months to coerce Germany. They let some food, it wasn't as total as during the war, but after the war, this will become a major issue in German politics. Look what they did to us. And the big thing is they had to force Germany to take responsibility, total responsibility, what's called the War Guilt Clause. Now, Germany did not, or was not fully responsible for the war. It should not be blamed, but they probably deserve most of the blame. But this was not true. But by making Germany admit to full responsibility, then they deserve to be punished. Yes. To start the war?
Yeah.
They're the ones who encouraged Austria to attack Serbia. So because they wanted, the assumption was we need to knock out our enemies, France and Russia now. Because if we wait any longer, they'll get stronger.
So Germany was allies. Okay.
Austria and well, in the beginning, then Italy actually joined the Allies later on. So they lost all of their colonies. Now, this really wasn't like a profitable thing for the Germans, their colonies. It actually cost the country a lot, but it's prestige. Look at our colonies. It's like, you lose something, then they become more valuable. But one of the things that really hit is they lost territory within Europe. They lost Alsace-Lorraine. Okay, they accepted that. France lost that in 1870. Here's the big area right here. They lost this massive area of East Prussian species, the area in black right here. It all went to Poland. So Germany was divided in 2. Main Germany, and then this area here called East Prussia. Germany divided into infuriated. They'll talk about this. It'll be known as the Polish Corridor to give Poland access to the sea. This will be the excuse Hitler will use to attack Poland on September 1st, 1939, World War I. And by far, the majority population who lived here were ethnic Germans, and now they're in Poland. There are other areas too, like Albany and Eupen in Belgium, but this is the one. Stuck. And then they had to limit the military. Dramatic limits. So much of German prestige was based upon the military. And so, you remember that 4.5 million men in uniform? Nope. When the war began, only 100,000. To the Germans, they felt totally, or totally defenseless, especially from the new Soviet Union. No Air Force. And the potential of planes was just starting to begin being realized. No subs. No capital ships are like the dreadnoughts, the big ships. And then lastly, no tanks. Now, tanks were not all that effective in World War I, but they showed great potential. But the whole point was now that Germany's going to build defenseless, and so much of their prestige, so much of what made Germany as they saw it great was their strength of their military, and they lost it. One more thing I'll add. This area right here, it's called the Rhineland, along the Rhine River. They said it's called demilitarized. Germany can put no troops, so there'll be a buffer between France and Germany. So they can't put troops in their own territory. This is going to be great on Germany. And yes, there'll be these right-wing political parties in Germany that will talk about building up the military. In fact, there'll be a political party in Germany literally called the Steel Helmet Party. And it was all about putting more men in helmets. And then reparations. They have to pay back. They have to pay for all the damage they caused in this war. And they have to pay for it because of the war guilt. Now, the treaty never said how much money they would pay. A commission would be created and eventually be about $33 billion. And they weren't really sure how they're going to pay it. What France wanted from this reparation is they wanted yearly payments that would be big enough combined with this to make sure they won't attack again. Well, it's not going to be quite that big, but it's going to be big enough to cause a drain. And you combine this with the rest, it's going to infuriate Germany for years. Why was this treaty put on us? Especially when the army marched home with good order after the war. Remember, I told you that on Friday. And we beat Russia. Did we really lose? Looking back at this treaty will do none of what the French wanted. It won't really do what the British wanted. And it was a disaster for Wilson. People who were liberal, foreign policy wise, and conservative, I'll tell you a little bit more about this in a second, hated this treaty. Both sides hated this treaty. Everybody. And for different reasons, but the treaty pleased nobody. That's why Wilson had to go home in the middle of the night when he left the treaty negotiations, because nobody was happy. There are stories about the big three: Wilson, Lloyd George, and Clemenceau, all with, they call them grease pins, but think about crayons. Using crayons to mark up on a big map of Europe, the new borders of Europe, like they're drawing the new borders in. They had it laid out on a billiards table, like they're creating a new Europe, and they had no idea what was really going on. They're going to fight it out on the map for the borders. You know what billiards are? Think about like a pool table, but no holes. You don't shoot the balls in the holes. You knock them in the corner, get them to stay there. It's a bigger pool table. So here, it turned out to be not this big of reparations, but this was a cartoon basically when it was implied it could be as many as $55 billion. But let's see, there's Germany, and like, how are you going to collect it? What are you going to do? Go to war again? And this was always hanging over people's head. How did they get the money? How did they get the cash people want? It has to be backed by gold. And they also had things like, okay, they have to give up products or give up goods that were in lieu of money. So, for example, part of the reparations were going to be 200 milk cows to Belgium. So they had to give money for milk cows. They had to give 100 camels to this new tiny little country called, you might have heard of it, it's called Saudi Arabia. That was so poor they had nothing at all. The entire treasury is around the neck of in a box. King Saud, 100 camels. This will come back to Germany. They will see this as from day one, even before they signed it, as an atrocity and an attack on Germany. And they will talk about this treaty for 20 years. Here is one of the more famous pictures of the treaty, and there's Lloyd George, Clemenceau, and Wilson leading Germany to the guillotine, the treaty. And here is a famous political cartoon, famous artist named Kafka wrote through this, but it's his mother and her child, starving child because of the starvation blockade. They won't forget. And this especially angered liberals who said Germany is going to want revenge. And political parties in Germany will take advantage of this. As you can see, that picture on the left that is the Treaty of Versailles, Germany breaking from its chains of the Treaty of Versailles, known as a SAG. See, and then look at the swastika star or star. One more thing. Versailles Treaty and what comes out of it? Hitler's pardon. Yeah. The people negotiate. So the big three, what are the most important to deal with? That's like the Allies impose this on the sea. The Allies impose. All right, so what about the new nations that are being created? Well, they thought they would have self-determination, let people decide their own fate. Remember talking about all those different groups having their own country? That's not what happened at all. Here's the old empires, here are the new nations. But now you go from a multi-ethnic Austro-Hungarian empire to a multi-ethnic Yugoslavia. Romania just got a big hunk of people here. There were Transvaals, there were Roma, there were Hungarians. They just got this big hunk of people here. They're not ethnically Romanians. Poland, 60% of the new Poland were Poles. That's it. Then you have a huge amount of ethnic Germans, Ukrainians, Lithuanians, White Russians, Czechs, etc. Little pieces of that were ethnically Czechs went to Poland, and vice versa. Czechoslovakia has Germans, Czechs, Slovaks, Ukrainians. It didn't solve that problem. Instead, it basically created a new powder keg. And there's still all these ethnic groups in Russia. Ukraine would be defeated and taken back by the Soviet Union. So, what about the colonies? Well, the colonies will become mandates. They won't get self-determination. They'll be controlled by the victorious countries. For example, German East Africa became the British colony of Tanganyika. Now it's Tanzania. And they carved out a hunk of that to give to Belgium. So Belgium got something, which is now Rwanda and Burundi. If you know anything about what's going to happen there in the 1990s, which will be a ginned up war, total war that would turn into a genocide in Rwanda. Why? Because they didn't really plan this. They just carved out areas with all these different ethnic groups. So, still that part, but nothing was a bigger mess than the Middle East. The British promised the Arabs independence. They promised Jews who lived, very few Jews actually lived in this region at that time. They promised them a homeland to escape persecution. And they also, them and the French said, we're going to take it. And that's what happened. The British and the French just created countries. They created a Palestine. They just kind of carved off a hunk of land. It's on the Jordan River, so we'll call it Transjordan. Now it's Jordan. 3 provinces of the Ottoman Empire, they turned into Iraq. Syria was carved up for France, and then they carved out a country called Lebanon for the Christian minority who lived there, which Israel is bombing at this moment, and with American weapons. And this will not solve anything. It's going to make it significantly worse. That's first story down the road. But virtually all the problems you see in the Mideast are going to come out of this, carving these up and lying to people about what's going to happen. So let's talk about foreign policy. What is liberal? What is conservative? It's important to know, not only because it's an important facet for down the road, but it's also important to know because this will help you on the DBQ. Aren't they nice? So I mentioned this in the reading, but let's go and get to it. Liberal, conservative. Now, someone could be liberal economically and conservative foreign policy and vice versa. Like I've said before, liberal and conservative are so misused all the time now. It's kind of hard to even understand where they come from. But liberal foreign policy, we believe the world is very complex, nuanced, a lot of gray area. So we need diplomacy. We need to talk. Even if somebody is your enemy, we have to understand potential enemy. Conservative, no, this is good versus evil. It's us versus them. Black and white. Or as someone who grew up like me in the Cold War, the maps were always the good guys, us, the free world in blue, and the communists in red. All the maps. But us versus them. So, bipolar, complex world. And next. So liberal, intervention, or internationals. We must get involved in international bodies like the League of Nations. We need things like that, or the United Nations, trade agreements, a world court. This is a better way to either avoid war or not go at it alone. Conservative, much more isolationist. We have our own problems, let's not worry about other problems. Getting in the world is dangerous entanglements. And it's not always about war. Sometimes you could have an internationalist who say, we don't want war, we want diplomacy to stop it. Or let's make sure when we fight a war, it's a big coalition of people. So it doesn't necessarily mean there won't be more war here. But an isolationist conservative, it's almost always unilateral. We're going to act alone. Has everyone got that? Act alone. We're not going to act. Just going to go. What are we today? Very conservative. President Trump very consciously did not ask anybody. Now, the war that was going on when you were a kid, born, the Iraq War, George W. Bush, President Bush, tried to get other countries involved. Most of them said Iraq doesn't have these weapons. So he was more liberal foreign policy, George W. Bush. Fairly conservative, more liberal. President Trump, no. Even though right now, on Saturday, he begged countries to escort ships from the street. He's now, we don't need you, now we're begging for help. Why? Well, we'll see. And so what about the treaty? Too liberal is too harsh. The Germans are going to be furious. They're going to want revenge. Liberals warned about this. Conservatives, it's too entangling. It's too entangling. It's going to get us involved in too many things around the world. We must be able to act alone. So those are the two big things. And therefore, here's the most important part of the treaty, the League of Nations. The League of Nations, part of the treaty. Everyone got that? It's part of the treaty. Specifically, Article 10. In the treaty, it's Roman numeral, but like in the packet, the DBQ, it'll write out. It'll write out. Just so you know, it's not Article X. It's also been George Washington. But what it meant is this: all the members of the United Nations, or I'm sorry, the League of Nations, every nation who joins will unify, be united against wars of aggression. Therefore, we'll stop these wars before they get too big. It's not meant to go to war. To a liberal, this would deter aggression. No country will want to fight the rest of the world. So no wars. It's meant to deter. This is the liberal idea. We can stop it before it gets going. Peaceful nations of the world will unify to stop this. But the conservative reaction, not only in the United States, but all the world, was harsh. In the US, does this violate the Constitution? The Constitution says only Congress can declare war. Does this imply that articles might get us into a war? I know that seems so quaint now to talk about the Constitution. Demanding Congress to declare war. We haven't declared war since 1942. I've told you before. Are we going to force into wars for others? If you're conservative and isolationist, you want to be forced to go to war? This is a valid point. I mean, how many people in here would want to go fight and die? So let's say Czechoslovakia is not taken by or Manchuria taken by or Austria taken. I'm telling you all events that happen to the UK. Are you willing to fight and die? I don't want to take a bullet in my face. Czechoslovakia. As much as I admire the nation, we just imagine I'm Ireland. All right. Now do you see the arguments? Liberal, conservative. So was it clear? Big fact. Do you see on top of your DBQ, it says, it was a strength of the opposition forces, both liberal and conservative. Does this help? All right. If you have any questions on the documents, ask. You got to take a position, which is the best way to write a thesis. Why? Go ahead and say this. Hockey. You're going to take hockey over. You didn't even run the back. You're going to mention time when you get back. Sounds good. Yeah. And you might have to be modeled. Give me something. You make the outline or you write the essay in class. So you can have it kind of planned out, but you have to. I want you to go through the process. Yeah, what were you?
Yeah. What's going on? I had to get my holiday form for everything.
Look, my water bottle.
Oh, college.
I'm graduating.
Why you have to do that in and out of that. But anyways, the holiday. I think we just did it.
I'm not sure if you feel it better.
I'm good. She didn't ask me. Didn't ask me. Now he's with you. Now, everybody, I have a gift. Grab one of these. Did it record? I don't think it recorded.